Okay, a quick little lesson today to prepare you for completing the assignments in Lesson 8 and Lesson 9. Hopefully now you're starting to get comfortable with the slope y-intercept form, or the y equals mx plus b, and identifying where the y-intercept is and where the slope is. So Lesson 8 should be kind of a review for you of some of those concepts that we've talked about in the last couple of lessons. It should be fairly easy for you to complete, fairly quick for you to complete. Just remember, you want the equation in the slope y-intercept form before you graph it. Identify what the y-intercept is, because that's where the line crosses the y-axis. Identify what the slope is and whether it's positive or negative, and use that to graph the line, okay? And then there's a word problem for you to figure out and graph. It's fairly straightforward, especially after the one that you completed in the last unit that was a lot more difficult, or the last lesson, sorry, that was a lot more difficult than this one. So it should be kind of a review for you of some of those stuff, and I'm hoping that you're starting to feel comfortable. In Lesson 9, it's about graphing using x and y intercepts. And so you're basically doing the same thing, except instead of just using the y-intercept and the slope, you're using the y-intercept and the x-intercept. And you find the x-intercept the exact same way that you do a y-intercept. So let me give you just a quick little intro to that. Okay, so your first, in part A, this is your first question. 3x plus 3x plus y equals 1. Okay, so in order to figure out the y-intercept, I set x equal to 0. So if I put in 0 for x, you know, okay, so I would rewrite it as this: x equals 1 minus 3x using my algebraic formatting. But if I'm setting this equal to 0, it's 3 times 0, which basically means 0, because anything times 0 is 0. So it means that x is going to be equal to 1. Now we do the same thing for the x-intercept. So with that same question, the same equation, instead of making it y equals, I'm going to make it x equals. So I'm going to say 3x is equal to 1 minus y. And I'm going to set y equal to 0. Okay, so then it becomes 3x equals 1, because 1 minus 0 is 1. And then x is going to be equal to 1 divided by 3. Divide both sides by 3. The 3's cancel each other out on the left-hand side of the equation. And, oh, I wrote the wrong thing. And it becomes 1 divided by 3, 1/3, okay? Then you take those two values. So you know what the y-intercept is, and you know what the x-intercept is, so you have two different coordinates. You know where the line crosses the x-axis, and you know where the line crosses the y-axis. So it's just a matter of connecting those 2 points to graph it, okay? So instead of coming up with a table of values or using the slope, we're just using an x-intercept and a y-intercept. Pretty straightforward. And the second part of this lesson, there is a word problem that asks you to work through it. It asks you the question, which is the independent variable, which is the dependent variable? That's just another way of saying x and y. The independent variable means that it's a variable that changes and which the other variable is dependent on. So in part B of this lesson, the boiling point of water is dependent on the height above sea level. So the boiling point of water is the y value, and the height is the x value, or the independent variable. Okay, so you're just using that to graph that equation. You will have to turn that equation around into a slope y-intercept form in order to graph it, or figure out what the x and the y-intercepts are by using this method that we looked at here. And then it asks you to do some critical thinking in identifying what's significant about the y-intercept and what that 0.0034, which is the slope, represents. So I want you to really think about what the question is asking and tell me your thoughts on what you think about those questions.